Anya, thank you so much, and thank you all here at the symposium in Hamburg, and to the Körber Foundation, really for giving Mary, Pat and I this wonderful opportunity to be able to share with you some of our experiences on our, as Mary said, our age-friendly journey in Ireland. We've been bowled over both by the wonderful hospitality that you've shown to us over these 2 days, but also by the incredible thought that you put into the organisation of this symposium. Yesterday we found it a really, really wonderful day. We were the interaction in the forums for us was absolutely fabulous, and I'm only sorry my slightly older sister wasn't able to join us at the Dusty Springfield concert last night, because she was really in that mode, and I was thinking of her very much during that. But the trip that you organised, it's been a wonderful couple of days. So thank you so much for your really warm welcome. I've put this picture up here of Jackson Pollock's Convergence. It's a very chaotic picture, but I suppose sometimes I think of it as a kind of a mind map that might be sitting on the desk of a mayor or a local authority, trying to join together all of the different issues that they're trying to resolve. And I think much was spoken yesterday around trying to remove barriers and take down silos. And I think when we do, we're left then with the challenge of actually how do we reconnect and manage very, very connected issues. And I think that the challenge of putting organisation on this is maybe the problem of our times. So connection is vital. And I suppose just before I get into the core of the discussion, sometimes there are connections that we can all be unaware of. And this was a wonderful learning when Karen and Tanya and Lisa came to join us, because in reality, we didn't know much about Körber, and Körber didn't know very much about us. But our research centre, the Netwell Centre at Dundalk Institute of Technology, is located in this building. It's the P.J. Carroll building, and up until 10 years ago, it was a cigarette factory, and it was largely equipped by Körber equipment. So the issue around generations and being separated by 1 or 2 layers of connection, it was there all the time, but nobody was aware of it and nobody saw it. So sometimes it's not much more than having to raise awareness, open our eyes and listen and forge connections. So what I'm going to go through a little bit is there'll be a small element of maybe duplication with some of the groundwork that Professor Kleinhold went through yesterday. I'll probably maybe put a slightly different twist on some of it, but it was a wonderful outlay of some of the more broader challenges. And then I started moving into some of the issues of people in the city and some of the challenges around creating age-friendly cities. And then what do we see going on in Europe at the moment in relation to implementation strategies? But I suppose I put this picture on the side of this, I suppose, for 2 things. I don't think we can ignore the reality that we are living in a world of constrained resources. That we're coming through a recession. We don't have the clean opportunities to put lots and lots of new money into things, but there is enormous resource, and an enormous amount of resource is in the efforts and energies of people. And this was just a voice we had. Our government a couple of years ago tried to change the eligibility to the medical card, which is an insurance card for older people for access to health services. And actually it was a step too far, and older people mobilised themselves and got out in the streets in very, very large numbers and said that this isn't right, and have been able to effect change and to make sure that we deal with things. So I think we can paint a wonderful picture and vision of where we need to go to, but I think we always need to challenge it with the issues around resources that we have available to us. You'll be pleased to know that this isn't any city in Europe. It's São Paulo in Brazil. But I think it's a very, very powerful image. I mean, we talked yesterday around some of the issues around inclusivity and cities for all people. And I think it's a very, very stark image around the problems that we have of our cities and the problems of exclusion and the problems of changing structure. I think we all have these kinds of boundaries and edges, whether they're as starkly physical as that in our cities or maybe more subtle. But we have some of these challenges that we really do need to address. And I suppose our city managers and that are they're trying to tackle these with a range of challenges around the table. So, you know, we talked an awful lot around the problems of demographic change and demographic challenge, but it's not the only challenge that cities are trying to deal with, and a real challenge is to try and reconcile our approach to demographic change in the face of dealing with these other challenges around urbanization, around globalization, and around climate change. And the view that I got of urbanization and the changing patterns in Germany yesterday were wonderful. But we in Ireland, probably more of our cities are still in slight growth, but the relationship between our cities and the rural hinterland is a vital piece that we need to recognise, because that's going to challenge us in relation to things like transportation and economics. You know, the other thing that we see in other cities is rapid expansion of cities just laterally, without being able to deal with the kinds of coherence and coordination that we should be able to try and get more compact cities. Climate change, I think, is an issue that we're all aware of, and I don't think anybody produces a policy these days that isn't looking at its impact on carbon footprint. And I think then, you know, globalization, the big challenge of, you know, what do we do in our cities? What do we make? What are our actions? You know, is it, you know, are we an industrial economy? Are we a service economy? You know, is there a large structure of small, medium enterprises? Or do we have dependencies on large businesses? Our play in all of those are all very, very interwoven. And in amongst all of that, we have the huge success of demographic change and longer living and how we pull it together. So, you know, I suppose there's a challenge around how do cities present or project themselves in being able to handle the reconciliation of these things. And I think a key is A, recognizing them, and B, planning for it, rather than being in denial and thinking that we can go ahead and move forward without recognizing this. And I suppose some of the kinds of things, and it came up in some of yesterday's discussions, age-friendly strategies are one of hundreds of strategies that are coming across the agendas. You know, healthy cities, child-friendly cities, learning cities, creative cities, smart cities, sustainable cities. They're all responses to these areas, and there are global influences from organisations like WHO and Habitat and UNESCO and UNICEF, and we have European and regional responses through regional strategies and smart specialisation. But it really does come down to this issue around how do we manage our urban governance, and the extent to which that's balanced between community engagement, citizen empowerment to be able to shape our future forward. You know, I think getting the balance in this in a convergent way, I think, is vitally important. You can't go to a demographics conference without these diagrams popping up all the time, and Professor Kleinhold obviously went through it in great detail yesterday. But these are the European pieces, and I think that, you know, the key issues that I suppose for us at the moment is really what's happening with the shape between the younger old and the older old. But we have a longitudinal study on ageing going on in Ireland at the moment with Tilda, and the results coming out of it at the moment, one of the key headlines is that 50% of the baby girls born this year will live to be over 100. That's 50%. And I was just trying to think of what does that mean, and actually, have I got a pointer here? Yeah. So we're looking. This was 2012, so they're sort of down here. By the time you get to 2050, they're in this bracket here. And what we're saying is that 50% of those are going to make it all the way to 100. I mean, that's an enormous success, but it's a huge change in our historical constant pursuit for sort of child-friendly policies and young and green. We really do have to open out the agenda to be able to recognise this. And then I suppose just to highlight this, again, Professor Kleinholt went through this diagram in great detail yesterday, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But I suppose one of the things that we saw here was it was heavily picked up. We had a European summit on active and healthy aging in Dublin back in 2013, and I suppose we were caught by how many people from throughout Europe and the world were highlighting this. So I think whilst we're recognising that this is a change in reality, I think the problem is that our public policy is not in tune with this, and we have a real, we're living these lives, and we're driving ourselves into these lives, and we're being drawn into these lives. But our public policy, our health systems, and our pension plans, and that, and security systems are not in line with that. And I think that's probably one of the key challenges that we have in terms of what we do locally and regionally, and pushing that up onto the national agenda. Because my sense is that this is going to be pushed rather than pulled, because I think it's too frightening to plan for otherwise, but I think it's a wonderful success, and I think the other thing we just need to recognise is that our functional capability does curve in all of this. So I think it's not to expect exactly the same level of activity down this end of the diagram than that, but there are activities, and I think we just need to reflect on individual capability in that going forward there. People in cities, what I'd like to try and do is maybe just outlay two alternative perspectives. And I suppose this is picking up some of the issues around reform and where investment is. But this is based on a diagram that was done by Dr. Tony O'Brien, who is the Chief Executive or Director General now of our health service in Ireland. And he was trying to outlay, I suppose, overlay what's the problem of public sector reform from a health system perspective in terms of how do we get services to people. And it was framed, I suppose, as a resource reconfiguration exercise around trying to rebalance equitable access, service quality, and financial balance in a way to be able to get better resources and better quality to the front line in order to be able to deliver these services to our citizens. But I think there were a few at the implementation conference when this was presented, and I think one of the things that's undermining us or underpinning us at the moment is, will there ever again be enough resource inside that triangle to be able to meet the demands of a growing population and growing service out at the edge? And I think what it calls for is a rethinking of how we engage with our citizen and with our clients and our public services, where we're not the problem to be solved by a service delivered over the front end, but we're actually an integral part of the system and the solution in relation to managing our own challenges as part of a much more end-to-end model. So I think there is this challenge from a public perspective around rethinking the organisational edge so that we are more empowered to self-manage and take more control, and that our own energies and initiatives are part of the resources that are used to solve our problems and solve our challenges. So that's probably looking at it from the inside out, from the perspective of service providers in the city. But I think the one that we're much more animated by is a much more person-centred view around the ecosystems around each and every one of us, and how we engage with people in the city, and how we engage with our families and our friends and our service providers. And this is a model around, we talk about person-centeredness in service design and service development, and it's certainly used an awful lot in the health system. But I often wonder whether or not we truly engage with the model of personal empowerment and person-centeredness. So if you put the person in the centre, then all sorts of other things start to flow around it. You have family and friends, you have informal carers, you have your neighbourhood, you have the public system and you have access to private services and that. So there's layers of this onion in which we engage and get access to services. And I suppose we're also going around the circle as well in relation to some of the dynamics around strong, active and active engagement when we're very strong and healthy, and issues around dealing with prevention and early intervention as things may start to decline a little bit, and then some of the heavier issues around engagement with the care and cure parts of our system. So we're kind of going around in sort of spirals around this, and there's a myriad of services dotted across this landscape. The structure of those services and where they are in I suppose these layers of the onion depends very much on. I mean, they're culturally and nationally variant. So different countries will look at this in slightly different ways. But one of the things that I think we've had to recognise in Ireland is that public services one, the orange one, isn't getting any bigger and is unlikely to get any bigger in our current time. So the only place that we can really pick up and address some of these service needs is either ourselves individually or through our informal networks that are available to us in our communities and families. So I think that's one of the key things in terms of where do we find the resources to tackle these things, and how do we energize and activate and align them. I think one of the parallel outcomes of working with a much more person-centered model and empowering access to services is, of course, the challenge that I urge is awareness. Do we know what's available? Do we know where it is? Can we map it together and form the ecosystem of pieces around us? And that was really the innovation that we brought together when you heard Pat talk yesterday a little bit about the role of the advocacy and Cultaca role. We need responses to be able to help support older people to manage and navigate their way around some of the access to these pieces. Whether that's technology, in some places, there's a view that that's a social worker, in other places it's a public health nurse. It depends on access, and certainly I think we're looking at that as being something that the community itself can take ownership of in terms of being able to point one's access to. But I think that's a necessary response when we do put the older person in the centre of the model, is to make sure that they have the awareness and access to be able to navigate their way forward. I'm going to move on a little bit now to our engagement with the World Health Organization Age-Friendly Cities movement, and how does that how did that work? Because we participated very early in it, so it certainly helped us shape our way forward. But I think you'll have heard a lot of discussion yesterday around domains, and just a little bit of framing for it. Many of the WHO strategies, either in relation to age-friendly cities or health equalities and that, they're framed in a view towards active aging, and the three underlying principles are around participation, health itself, and security. And so they're the underlying principles that are animating. I think all of the strategies that come forward. The age-friendly cities program, in essentially, it's very simple. It's around bringing people together to talk with them around what are their views on these 8 domains. The 8 domains they're quite holistic. When we look at them, pretty much everything is covered, or there's a slot in here for everything. So housing and outdoor spaces and transport, I suppose, would be much more kind of physical and environmental. social participation, I think speaks for itself. Issues around civic participation and employment, respect and inclusion and engagement, and then information access, communications, and then there's access to support and services. Essentially, one has used this as an agenda for a dialogue with older people in the community. I think that dialogue needs to be, and in fact the WHO would say it needs to be broader than just older people. It needs to be with older people, and when they framed it, they were certainly encouraging dialogue with both the younger old and the older old, and older people in different socioeconomic circumstances, so that it was a very inclusive dialogue right across the spectrum, but also a dialogue with carers, to understand the challenges that carers have, both in their own role and as a proxy for the person that they care for, so that voice comes through. To have a conversation with the private sector and with chambers of commerce and with members of the private sector community, with the NGOs and non-governmental organisations, and also with the public services, so that you've got a round view from both people and providers around their views on this. And I think it did one thing, and it was interesting yesterday where the dialogue was around the conversation in order to baseline. I think what was happening here was one extra question, and the very asking of that question changed the nature of the dialogue. So it's not just how are things in relation to these, but what might we want to do about it? And that very first question was a question of co-design and participation and creation and shared ownership. And that changed the dynamic of the engagement, but it also opened an enormous avenue of creative ideas around how we might be able to solve these things. And those dialogues are the kinds of things that allow projects like the Good Morning Call service and men's sheds and other things to start to emerge. So, it's getting that dialogue, shaping an agenda around these topics. And it looks simple now. I mean, the challenge that we've always got here is do those petals become silos in their own right? Because again, our lived experience is across all of these. But what comes out of it is multi-stakeholder collaboration, an agenda energized by the voices of older people, and I suppose a framework for continuous improvement, in the sense of getting a sense of where we are, but also getting a sense of where we want to get to, and how to move forward on that. Our own experience, and this would be, I think, what we would see in many of the cities participating in this age-friendly cities issue, is one takes these guidelines which shape both questions and topics for discussion here, and they get exercised and implemented in local situations, resulting in locally owned action plans. And I think that's the key. And so there's a commonality between the action plans and a sharedness because they're framed by the same framework, but the detail and the responses are much more natural and context dependent. I mean, certainly for us in Dundalk and County Louth, connection was a huge issue around rural transport and access from our rural hinterland into Dundalk and Drogheda, and where the key services were. Issues around confidence. And I suppose the senses of safety and security. A huge amount of requirement for better access to information in whatever form that is, whether or not it's direct face-to-face through services such as the Cultaca, or web-based services and shaping content. I mean, one of the very big things that we were able to do was work with the Citizens Information Service, simply to change the frame of a directory to information, because historically they produced a directory of who does what, but you needed to know which agency to look at and then look through, right? If you simply change that around to saying, well, let's look at our life experiences, so I may have a problem with housing, or I may have a problem with nursing homes, or I may have a problem with passport access. You come at it from the context of the need, and then you find which are the services, and you get some really interesting results, because even our health service runs transport services, which was something that we weren't aware of. I think the ongoing dialogue around universal design and design for all and these other kinds of models. But I think regardless of the philosophies, there are issues around places being shareable and negotiated and environments that are tolerant to people with lots of different needs and requirements, where we do need to recognise some of the challenges around frailty. And then issues that came up yesterday around intergenerational solidarity and projects that are spanning the generations. And I suppose underpinning this all is the energy for change, being older people themselves. This is not something that's coming from the top down. This is something that's coming from the community, but it's framed in a wider agenda that I think makes it easy. Sometimes there is lots of discussions around, all the petals are equal, but some petals are more equal than others. I think one of the things that certainly we find is that to engage with all of this, we do need a kind of a paradigm shift in terms of how we view aging and how we can have the conversation. So the experiences for older people in cities is very rich and very profound. It's not just about services. It's around how open the city is, and in sense, how much love is there in a city in terms of its engagement with people and how open and attached and the space for dignity and humanity. So I think if one can crack that, you create the space for all of the other decisions and all of the other discussions that need to be engaged. But that's a very soft topic, and it's a difficult one to engage with in public discourse. Not only is there a thing, but issues are highly interconnected, and I think that was one of the things. So this is a first look at that chaotic convergence picture of Jackson Pollock. I take no responsibility for this diagram, although we often go to conferences where he who has the most. We compare the pyramid diagrams and we compare the complexity diagrams. This is the obesity map from the Foresight study in the UK. And obviously, diet and nutrition and that is a big issue, and it's one of the major health concerns for older people. But you can see that there's a lot of interconnectedness there. But if I frame it a little bit, you've got how a person responds to things, but you've got everything from food production to patterns of food consumption, a person's individual physiology, the levels of exercise they're getting, the environment in which they can get exercise, their psychological engagement with how they might want to see themselves in relation to. All of those interact. And I'm not saying that we can manage them all in a very systems way, but we have to recognize that our approach to dealing with good food production and good food consumption and good diet for older people isn't just the access to the restaurant or the access to the shop. It's where does the food come from, its level of freshness. There's a whole array of things. We start looking at this, and then that starts to ask questions right throughout the whole range of activities that the city's engaged with. So you put all that back together, and you get that kind of diagram. But that level of complexity and that level of interconnectivity is not. It's not unusual. It's similar for issues around loneliness. It's similar for issues around frailty. It's similar for any of the kinds of challenges that we need to do. We have to look beyond the immediate and understand all of the context and what levers can we draw on. And I think this is probably one of the key challenges that we are facing is obviously the problem of dementia and cognitive decline, and the extent to which we can use the combination of our empowered ecosystems to help people navigate their way through these kinds of accesses to exercise and to services is huge. So I think framing the agenda, there's a terminology that's been used now for a few years called health in all policies, and I think really what we're looking at the moment is maybe age in all policies, but it's also age across. The issue is maintaining these policies in integration, and I suppose one of the things, and it's interesting your discussion here is with municipalities. Our discussion in Ireland is with counties, and in some places in Europe the discussion is with regional authorities. To some extent, it's a little bit around trying to find the lowest spatial hierarchy where you get everybody around the table. I think that was an issue that was coming out yesterday, was how do we get people around the table to deal with these things? There may be places that you have all of these stakeholders around the table, but they may not today be dealing with issues around aging and demographic change. So one of the things I think that we found was we had local county development boards. In fact, I'll move on to it here, I think, here. We had county development boards in Ireland which were responsible for economic, cultural and social planning within the county. Different agencies were responsible for the delivery of their own plans, but this board came together to align the individual plans of different agencies. But what it did mean was that we had a place in our structure where we had all of the stakeholders sitting around the table. And I think that was, so we didn't have to create a new structure to deal with the problem. There was one there. What it didn't have was an integrated agenda. And I think that was one of the wonderful things that the age-friendly agenda did, because we were able to bring an agenda that had all of these issues together and lay it out and say, can you re-look at this and start to think around how you might be able to work together to be able to deliver this. So the key on this is the Age-Friendly Alliance, and I'm very lucky now to chair that alliance in County Louth. But it brings together our health service, our local authorities, our industrial partners, our educational partners, our local development agencies, and more very specifically, members of Louth's Older People's Forum, which is our council of older people. It's been interesting in Ireland. The model that we have here now has replicated to 32 local authorities at this stage, and I suppose that generically is replicating quite a lot throughout Europe. But we would have found, for example, that in Louth we had to build the Older People's Forum because our older people's groups were very fragmented. There are other counties where there are older people's groups there already, and it's really just a case of harnessing them and aligning them. When I'm hearing around all of the senior citizens councils that you've got here in Germany, it sounds as though some of the key building blocks are there to be able to engage with this agenda. But I think one of the things that we did want to say was that there was a health and well-being agenda, but there was also an economic and wealth dimension to the agenda as well. And I think that was a very important aspect to how we go forward. I'm going to just very quickly run through just a few of the services and innovations. I mean, we talked a lot about them yesterday. When Pat was discussing, Pat is in Gaelic a cultacha. That's his Gaelic job description, and it's a wonderful name because it's almost impossible to say and even more difficult to describe, because it's both an advocate for older people, but it's a professional friend, it's a service negotiator, and it's a personal planner. It's all of those things together, but also it's the eyes and ears of service gaps. Bringing in that role has helped strengthen our older person's engagement with the processes that we're dealing with, and I think that's something that is looked at in every situation, maybe using different responses. But I think, that one is vital for us. One of the pieces that we found very helpful was if there was a reasonably large catalytic project that could focus people's minds quickly. it allowed a lot of the issues to come out very quickly. We can talk around wanting to do age-friendly communities, but we need to get into projects, and we need to get into projects that are for which there is the necessary engagement of all of the partners. So our housing scheme represented one of those projects that really threw a lot of issues to our health service, to our local authorities, to our NGO agencies. So from that perspective, it becomes a catalyst for change. It was also I suppose it's been innovative in its own right, in the sense that we were looking at new issues around lifetime adaptability and how housing could adapt to people's needs over a longer course. But it did challenge us, because we had we talk about silos. A lot of people started a discussion saying, which particular type of older person is this for? Is it a person with one leg? Is it a person in a wheelchair? Is it a person with a dementia? Is it a person with a chronic disease? It was, or can we do a specialized housing? And said, this is not what it's about. Older people will grow and we decline functionally, and we don't know in which directions, and we have to respond to that in different ways. So it was very much around introducing the adaptability to be able to respond to different needs. And I suppose one of the things that we were very lucky here was not only in terms of the architectural adaptability, but also the technological adaptability. But what the local authority did was provide us with a wonderful site for it. It's an urban site, so it's within walking distance to the town centre. Within 150 yards, it has everything it needs. Most importantly, the pub, but pharmacies, supermarkets, post offices. So it's not a housing scheme behind a hedge. It's a street in a town with access to everything else. So it doesn't actually look much different to anything else. There's 15, 18 older people living in there and engaging in the city, and there's just some additional supports going in there to support it. Where we have been very lucky is that it's adjacent to a primary care centre, so it has particular proximity to certain things, and I think issues of proximity become some of the key challenges that we need to address. So I won't dwell on it, but there is, I suppose, the kinds of features that have come into it are addressing many of the issues that we're talking about. Our responses in relation to sustainable energy and climate change, and then some of the infrastructure people. But it does involve very much a co-design approach, and one of the big learnings that we had, because we went into some of this with much the same stereotype of others, that technology is fine, but it's not for older people, or it's not for this generation of older people. It may be for the next generation of older people. But could we engage with technology as a response and as part of the ecosystem, and as part of the engagement of our ecosystem? And could it be more than the responses that we would have had for 20 or 30 years in terms of pendant alarms and that? And could we shift from reaction to adverse events to prevention and intervention and early awareness? So they're the kinds of things that we've been exploring in the house. But what you're seeing here is, for example, the older people's concerns around wanting to know issues around safety and security. So this is an iPad app that they've got that's letting them see what's the status of their windows and doors, and are ovens turned on, or is water leaking, what's the temperature outside, because I might want to go and have a walk. But the co-design issues of older people engaging with us in the development of these applications. Again, it's turning the systems around a little bit, and that's just an example of one of the interfaces that we've developed in relation to older people managing their well-being, in terms of being able to look at the colours. Would be your classic traffic light, green, red, and orange, but customizable around different dimensions of your health and well-being, and feeding that information back to help provide some inputs to be able to self-manage. I think the other piece that was very strong for us was the economic, the participation of our economic forum, and we were looking to older people around their role both as producers and consumers in our society going forward. So we developed an age-friendly business action plan, which was dealing with issues around product and service opportunities, wisdom in the workforce, how can we retain older people in the workforce for longer and leverage their wisdom, recognition systems, senior startups, older people retiring and then maybe moving into mentoring and setting up consultancies, and a very large one around overall raising awareness and that, so that the economic participation in the city was anchored. I think what stunned us was the reaction that we had, and we're seeing more throughout Europe, of how that awareness of older people in the economic participation of the city animates so many other dimensions of the economic aspects of the city. So what we were seeing was that age awareness was impacting on indigenous industry, how we do retail. It's impacting on how we're starting to organise tourism and heritage going forward. More opportunities for education and training. It's not much more than having to raise awareness, but you've got to get the ears open so that you can respond, and so that there are responses to this. And it's early in our journey down here, but I think this is a vital dimension of that age-friendly engagement. I suppose I'm on the homeward stretch here at the moment, so just a little bit around the European approach that we've got at the moment, because obviously demographic change and the responses are, they're a key German challenge, but they're a key challenge throughout Europe. And one of the responses that we've been looking at is the European Innovation Partnership for Active and Healthy Aging. That was launched, I think, back in 2011, and it was set within a strategic operational plan around, I suppose, three pillars and this coordinating or horizontal action. So it's not a research and development initiative. It's much more around trying to harness organizations and agencies and authorities that are implementing at the coalface to share and learn, and then maybe help drive the agenda for innovation and that going forward. So I think it's a case of trying to get implementation pull rather than research push. So there are issues around prevention and promotion, specifically issues around falls and frailty, chronic diseases and independent living. But this large one across the top is age-friendly building cities and environments, which is how might we be able to respond to that. And at the moment, I suppose we're looking at a broad goal. It's challenging, which is adding 2 healthy life years. In much the same way that we have a 20% reduction in carbon footprint on the climate agenda, there's a strong goal here around healthy life years and extending healthy life years. And that being picked up through issues around impact on the citizen, effectiveness of services, and engagement in economy. And the actions that are there, and I think these are open platforms that are really there to help strengthen or attach to your own activities in any ways that may be relevant or amenable to you. That action plan itself, which is around cities implementing and mobilizing networks. But the WHO themselves are engaged on a European project here to look at these guidelines that we've been working with to adapt them to the European context and to understand what might some of the indicators and measures be that would be able to start to look at an information sharing model across Europe. So that's ongoing work at the moment. And then one of the large aggregators of older people's NGOs in Europe, Age Platform, are driving a project called AFE InnovNet, which is a thematic network for municipalities throughout Europe and regional authorities, in fact, any level of governance that might want to engage in age-friendly practices, and they can join a network. So I'm sure these are absolutely open and available to everybody here if we want to explore them. So I do think that networks is a critical way of being able to help shape our way forward. I think, you know, and the pulling together that you've done here today has been amazing in terms of the networks that you're building. But I think it does a few things. I think it does help heighten our awareness and expand our knowledge. But I think maybe more profoundly, it helps widen our attitudes and elevate our values. I think it can challenge us to raise the bar in relation to the kinds of things that we do. But I think in peeling away the barriers and trying to take away the silos, we have to order the agenda in different ways. And I think what we find that is that those cross-cutting things now get drawn into the centre. So it does challenge us to manage things in new ways in relation to how we deal with things in the centre. I think the key element is to trust the experience of our older people in cities to be the guiding force, and to empower personal navigation of the city and the services. It's a very powerful ethical ambition. I mean, we talked about motivations and what draws people into these kinds of things, and it's a very strong ethical cause, engagement with older people and making older people part of our you know, central part of our cities and dealing with life course. But I think we also need to, and this is a challenge for us in the profession and others, is to engage not just with the ethical dimension, but I think also the poetic. I think there's as much art in all of this as there is science, both in our approach and I think in our products and our outcomes. And I think if we can try and find that balance, we really will be able to make very wonderful cities for us all to age with. So thank you very much. Okay.
Ja, vielen Dank, Lord Bond. Und es ist eine Gelegenheit, an dieser Stelle mal den Heiligen Geistern hier im Raum einen Applaus zu spenden, nämlich die dafür sorgen, dass wir das alles so wunderbar mitkriegen. Ja. Everything okay?
Ja.
Ja, fine. Wenn man Ihnen zuhört, fragt man sich, woher haben Sie diese Power, dieses Engagement? Was macht Ihnen Spaß an dieser Arbeit?
I think it is the agenda. I suppose when I started, I was an architect thinking around spaces and forms and what the city looked like. But the more we got engaged with the project, you really get it's not the architecture, it's the people, and you gain your energy from the people that you're dealing with and the people that you work with. I mean, the Marys and the Pats and all of those others that are in our ecosystem. It's a no-brainer. The energy is there. Yeah.
Ein wesentlicher Punkt in dem, was Sie uns erzählt haben, ist, es muss ein Dialog entstehen. Menschen müssen zueinander kommen. Wie schaffen Sie das?
I think in many instances, part of those networks are there in the starting point. You know, people are sitting together in places. So I think one of the pieces that we had to do, in fact Mary did an awful lot of work with me, was we had to go out to where people were and sit with them in their place rather than bringing them into yours, and get to understand what the world looks like from that position and then start to mold it.
Das heißt, einer muss gehen. Ich habe mal eine Bitte, können wir den Beamer ausschalten, sonst sehen wir nämlich kaum jemand, der die Hand hebt. Geht das, den Beamer auszuschalten? Wunderbar. Fragen und Ergänzungen von Ihrer Seite, bitte. Ja, das Mikrofon muss da mal.
Ja, Dagmar Vogt-Jansen, Stadt Hannover. Sie arbeiten ja in dem Programm Age-Friendly Cities, pardon. Wenn es jetzt eine andere Überschrift gegeben hätte, also gesunde Städtenetzwerk gibt es in Deutschland beispielsweise, dann wäre ja so etwas wahrscheinlich auch möglich gewesen, wie Sie es dort aufgebaut haben. Im Laufe dieses Kongresses habe ich mir die Frage gestellt, ob die Überschrift altersfreundliche Städte überhaupt noch so zu akzeptieren ist, ob wir die jüngere Generation da mitbekommen oder ob es vielleicht eine andere Überschrift benötigt jetzt im Laufe der Zeit.
I think you've hit a key challenge, and in Ireland we will have healthy cities networks also. So we have some cities that are engaging in that, and I suppose some of the things. Again, I think that diagram of convergence is a key piece, because they've started from a slightly different place. They've tended to get. At least certainly in Ireland, their original seeding would have been in the health systems area of public health and health promotion. So there was a slightly different starting point for those. But I think you're absolutely right. You're all of the same agencies are going to come around and sit around the same table and discuss an awful lot of the same issues around that. So I do see a real opportunity for convergence, but I think it's challenging to bring all of those agendas in the one time to one organisation. I mean, we have also child services committees which run in parallel with our own. We're working hard to see how we can draw them in, but again, sometimes we find that maybe a child services agenda is focusing today it's focusing very tightly on children of a particular age with a particular set of problems. I think over time we really ought to be able to get these converged into a much more integrated approach. Yeah.
Ich glaube, hinter der Frage steckte auch, ob der Begriff altersfreundlich und das Wort alt nicht eher abschreckend ist für so eine Arbeit.
I don't think so anymore. I mean, I think some of the big cities that may have had issues around wanting to promote and market a view of being young and being green and being, all of those other tags. I think we can look to age friendly as being a very inclusive and warm approach to the city itself, and it is for all ages. I mean, I think how it breaks out. At the moment, certainly the agenda leans very much towards the 60s and over in terms of the issues. But I don't think there's anything in that agenda that we see as being exclusive in that. But a big issue is around the issue of how do cities see themselves and how do they want to market themselves going forward.
Armin Oertel, Stiftung Alsterdorf. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich es richtig verstanden habe. Sie haben erzählt von der Kultaka Row, oder ich hoffe, ich spreche es richtig aus. Meine Frage ist das ein Prinzip oder ist das tatsächlich eine Aufgabe, die eine Person richtig umsetzt? Und wo macht sie das? Wie kommt sie zu den Menschen, denen sie zur Selbsthilfe helfen soll? Wer bezahlt sie? Wer bildet sie aus? Was auch immer.
At this stage, it's a developmental role in our community. So we're starting to address some of the challenges of how do we replicate it and how do we and building the training programs to be able to replicate it going forward. I mean, there are certain situations where a family member may become a kultaka for. In terms of organising all of the services and supports around somebody else in the family. What we're looking at here is I suppose that role where that expertise can be shared amongst many older people with needs in the community. So we are building it to try and work out how to replicate the role going forward. I think it becomes quite context dependent in relation to what different cities and different sets of organisations look like, and I think that's one of the things that we need to understand is how it adapts in different places.
Vielen Dank. Matthias Gruhl, Behörde für Gesundheit und Verbraucherschutz in Hamburg. Ich habe eine Frage. Sie haben sehr klar und deutlich sowohl die Strategien, die es gibt und diese Möglichkeiten geschildert. Sie haben auf der anderen Seite auch Beispiele geschildert, wie man es umsetzt. Meine Frage ist, reden wir noch von Pionieren oder reden wir schon von einer Massenbewegung? Und die darauffolgende Frage, gerade aus wissenschaftlicher Sicht, Haben Sie irgendwelche Indikatoren, wo Sie dran den Erfolg messen können, was wir da alles planen und machen? Also gibt es irgendwelche Daten, von denen Sie sagen, ja, ich kann mir aufgrund unserer ganzen Bemühungen ein Ergebnis messen lassen und dieses Ergebnis zeigt, ich habe etwas erreicht?
Beginnen wir mit der Pionier- oder Massenbewegung.
Yeah. I think on that one we're on a threshold. I think there is enough work that's gone on at the moment for this to scale up rapidly. So I think it is now in the world of a movement, but maybe at its still early stages. In relation to, there's a lot of work going on in relation to the metrics and the indicators and the measures, more so because of there are some are relevant to the internal management and are there locally. The bigger work is, can we identify things that can be shared across cities responding to this so that there's some comparability in the measures and the indicators. That's work that's going on within at two levels, both within the WHO European project at the moment and also within the European partnership to try and get a set of more comparable metrics. I think at this stage, most of the measures that we would have would be more process-oriented in relation to the effects on change, as opposed to very, very broad indicators of high-level measures on change or quality of life or service effectiveness to date. We're still early on that stage.
Vielleicht steckt hinter dieser Frage auch das Bedürfnis, bevor man etwas beginnt, muss man einen Erfolg schon absehen können. Hatten Sie etwas begonnen und gab es so etwas, wir müssen Erfolg haben?
Yes, but I think one of the things that we wanted to try and get a balance of was we need evidence to reinforce the commitments going forward. And Mary spoke yesterday around issues around evidence and how important that is. But a lot of that evidence tends to come out of pilot projects where the contexts are a little bit wrapped up in cotton wool and they're protected, and so it's not, pilots are sometimes not, stage ones of longer term implementation projects. So I think framing this not as a pilot but as a first stage of a long term journey, it was framing it in a slightly different way. So success was going to, it needs to sustain itself to go forward. But I think what we've found was that evidence will go so far, but to translate and to move into large-scale implementation, leadership becomes a very, very important dimension. That there are risks that have to, if everything is so strongly evidence-based, you've removed the risk and everybody's doing it. At these early stages, leadership and commitment becomes a very, very, very important element and a sense of putting the effort in to get it across the line. Yeah.
Wir werden das wahrscheinlich in der Podiumsdiskussion nachher nochmal erörtern. Gibt es Fragen, Ergänzungen von ihr? Oh ja, hier geht es ja. Die Dame dort hinten, bitte.
Ich möchte nochmal an meine Vorrednerin anschließen, und zwar das Wort Senioren und Alter stößt mir immer so ein bisschen auf, wenn ich jetzt höre altersgerechte Stadt, altersfreundliche Stadt. Es gibt ja einige Begriffe, die sind mittlerweile negativ besetzt. Also das Wort Senioren ist negativ besetzt, habe ich gelernt. Es gibt viele, meine Nachbarin zum Beispiel, die ist stolz darauf, in Rente zu sein, aber sie möchte keine Seniorin sein. Und wir müssen da auch ein bisschen umdenken. Wir haben ja zum Beispiel bei den Kindern auch die Abgrenzung Kleinkinder, Kinder, Schüler, Jugendliche, und das ist eine Abgrenzung von 15 Jahren. Und bei den Senioren geht das ja los ab 60 bis, wie wir jetzt gelernt haben, bis 100, und wir grenzen die alle nur, oder wir schütten die alle nur in den Topf Senioren. Und es gibt viele, die fühlen sich einfach nicht alt. Also sie sind zwar vom Alter her vielleicht 70, aber sie fühlen sich nicht alt. Und ich möchte da mal das Wort Mehrgenerationen ins Spiel bringen. Das habe ich hier heute noch überhaupt nicht gehört, denn es geht ja auch darum, jüngere Generationen mit einzubinden. Die sollen sich ja auch angesprochen fühlen. Also zum Beispiel bei dem Wort Mehrgeneration fühle ich mich auch angesprochen. Wir haben hier in Hamburg jetzt zum Beispiel im Verhältnis wenig Engagement im Verhältnis zu anderen Städten, weil wir eigentlich auch eine junge Stadt sind. Wir kriegen sehr viele junge Leute hier in die Stadt und trotzdem müssen wir aber auch die älteren Personen nicht vergessen.
Wie ist das mit der Sprache im Englischen? Haben Sie das Problem auch? Senioren, Alte, Rentner, sodass Leute sagen, das will ich nicht sein?
I think language is a huge challenge in all of this, and you know whether it's in the issues that you were raising there. I think at some point, you know, there's a reality check where we have to get off the fence and say aging is happening, and age is a process from beginning to end, and it's something that we need. If the terminology of age is something that's negative, we all have a piece of work to do in terms of changing that around, because it's the reality, it's what we face. We're not fighting it, we live it and we engage with it. So, you know, if that's a challenge to our marketeers, it's a challenge to our marketeers, but I don't think we should run away from it, and because we can find a word that is so diluted, it means nothing, and I think that's something to be wary of.
Also wenn jemand eine Idee hat, ne? Bitteschön.
Thank you, Anne Schofield, Newcastle. First of all, I just want to thank you. That was a fabulous presentation, and I hope we'll get a copy of it, to copy it. But I just wanted to make a point, really, that in Newcastle, we've been on a journey. And we found the model that has been presented through Louth, in Ireland, about connection between the national and the regional and the local, really, really helpful. So I would, again, say how important that is. But I was particularly interested in this point about dismantling silos, because I would say in Newcastle, we have a long history of partnership working and a very good track record between the university, the city council and the voluntary sector, and our very important agencies such as the Elders Council. But how we actually move people across and out of their silos, which are quite comfortable. People are comfortable. They know that actually this is the job I do around here. So if you suddenly say, no, we're going to talk about the economy, we're not going to talk about the issues of ageing, it makes some economists quite nervous. So I thought it was a really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean the boundaries of breaking down these silos are you know, and our problem is not only are they silos but they become boundaries of specialization. So you're almost not allowed talk about something in the parallel silo because it's not your discipline, and we have to break those down so that we can have those horizontal conversations. Yeah.
Gerrit Köster, Sozialplaner bei der Stadt Aachen. In Ihrem Vortrag gab es viele sehr interessante Anregungen auf internationaler, auf nationaler, auf kommunaler Ebene. Ich habe vermisst das Wort Quartier. Was für eine Rolle spielt das Quartier bei der Umsetzung Ihrer Ideen, die Sie ja in sehr interessanter Weise verfolgen?
If I'm reading you right, that's a small neighbourhood level. I think very much so. And you know, we've, you know, to some extent, when we start wanting to do things, the questions are, you know, can we find advocates who will take the innovations on? And in many instances, they will come at a neighbourhood level. When we did the age-friendly town programme in Louth, that's a town of a population of about 5,000. You know, where we could work with that. The housing scheme that we've dealt with here, the service model that came in around it was servicing a neighbourhood of about 2,500. You know, so we work with those different neighbourhoods and different levels, and it really is an interesting challenge around how do you aggregate the innovations and the change across different spatial levels, because in Ireland they're not always coterminous. You know, that if you might start with a local neighbourhood in relation to maybe the housing and park element. But if you want to connect with the health system aspect of the public health nurse, you're going to have to take in change at another geographic level, because that's the scale of operation. So we have challenges, I think, everywhere around these different scales.
Vielen Dank, Tanja Kitziak vom Berlin Institut. Vielen Dank für den Überblick auch über die verschiedenen Netzwerke. Und meine Frage ist, was bringt es denn, in so einem Netzwerk zu sein? Also ganz konkret jetzt zum Beispiel das WHO-Netzwerk. Gibt es da Feedback, wenn man eine Strategie einreicht, oder ist es vor allem dieser Austausch, der sozusagen der Benefit ist? Also warum lohnt es sich Zeit und doch auch viel Arbeit in solchen Netzwerks, darin zu investieren, in einem Netzwerk präsent zu sein?
I think at the moment the services that these networks can offer are still evolving. So I think today it's in many instances, it's the moral support and the awareness and the reinforcement that you get from working with other cities. We haven't yet got to the stage where one city might do a peer review of another in relation to qualitative improvement, but I think they're the kinds of things that are being explored at the moment.
Was sagen Sie denn dazu, dass es keine deutsche Stadt gibt im WHO-Netzwerk? Sie dürfen schimpfen.
Okay, no, I think it's an opportunity, and I think it's a resource that's there to engage with. So, I think I'm sure that's open on both sides. I remember at the very, very beginning there were some German researchers who participated in the very, very early study. But I think there are different local contexts for why people may or may not engage. But I think it's an open and it's a valuable resource that's there, and I'm sure that everybody within the WHO would love massive German participation in it if that was possible. Ja.
Gibt es noch? Ja.
Mein Name ist Klaus Langschwager, ich komme vom VDK Hamburg. Ich habe eine Frage. Welche Kommunikationswege wollen Sie zukünftig nutzen, um die Informationen an die Älteren zu bringen? Unter anderem auch mit dem Hintergrund, dass wir ja die Informationsdichte also alle 4 Jahre etwa verdoppeln. Das heißt, die heutigen Informationswege wie Internet werden so nicht funktionieren. Sie müssen das für ältere Leute versuchen begreifbar zu machen. Welche Methodik haben Sie da im Hinterkopf?
Yeah. Well, I suppose today we're dealing with the most difficult approach, which is what we would refer as multi-channel. So we're dealing with face-to-face contacts with direct involvement through people like the Kultaka and access to voluntary bodies. We deal with paper publications. We deal with the internet. We deal with radio. is a very strong medium to use. A lot of older people in their homes will use radio. So I think it's to try and find which for a long time I think we're going to have to be using every and any channel that we can, and radio is actually a very powerful one.
Gibt es noch eine Frage? Sonst schließe ich... Ach, da hinten. Ja, Entschuldigung, bitte.
Alina Pucilowski, hallo. Ich schreibe meine Doktorarbeit über gemeinschaftsorientierte und sinnstiftende Altersgesellschaften. Und da wollte ich fragen, ob dieser Begriff oder diese Dimension der Sinnstiftung bei Ihnen auch schon Einzug hält. Dass es nicht nur um die Aktivierung der Älteren geht, um die Integration, sondern um dieses sinnstiftende Element. Was wollen wir denn machen? Wie wollen wir denn auch sinnstiftend und sinnvoll alt werden und unser Altwerden mitgestalten?
I think it's vitally important. I think it's probably the question in relation to the meaning in our lives and the purpose in our lives and what gets us up in the morning to do the things that we do at the end of the day. Ja. Ja.
Gut, es ist 10:15 Uhr. Von mir zum Schluss eine persönliche Frage. Rottborn, Sie spielen Golf. Ist Golf eine altersfreundliche Sportart?
Actually, it is, and it's the membership of most golf clubs would have a very interesting age profile if you looked at them. But and it's kind of interesting because I think you can come to it later in life and develop a good swing, and you can play. You know, you don't have to start as a child to be good as a senior.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.